Hey everybody, welcome back. I am your host, Joe JDF Foster, and today's episode will be based on a soap opera from the 1960s known as Dark Shadows. Now, for a lot of you, this will be unheard of or be unfamiliar, and for some, it'll be down memory lane. But hopefully, I can still provide some entertainment in both sections. For those of you who don't know, this was an example. This was a soap opera that came out during your parents or grand great your parents or grandparents' days, maybe even great grandparents' days, about a vampire that was living in Maine and had to deal with the curse that was placed upon him of being a vampire because he broke a witch's heart. There have been, and we'll get into that, and we'll get into more about it here in just a second. But to me, this is a great example of old school TV shows that were underrated at the time they came out and then gained following over the years. And even if it's not as popular today as it was in between the two, in between the time it ran, and now it had a run where it was loved. I mean, it's even had a revival that starred Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who most of you would remember as Robin in the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. Now, on to some things about this. This was a soap opera that ran on ABC from 1966 to 1971. It started off in black and white, though in '67, if my facts when I looked it up were correct, and what I saw on Tubi, TUBI, app are actually correct, it switches to color from there on. And it was the first soap opera, at least on ABC, to be changed into color. And it's also the first soap that was offered in syndication. Now, as for the idea, like I said, the idea of this soap was originally that a woman comes to live at this house in Maine. It's a coastal fishing town where the supernatural take place. But during the start of this show, it didn't start off well, and they ended up making it where they had an option. They could either try and make the ratings higher or get rid of the show. So they brought on the character of a reluctant vampire. And for what I could find, it was actually the first use of the reluctant vampire trope on TV. Where, in the case of the vampire, they didn't want to feed, and the idea of the vampire was actually a curse rather than something that happened to them that they took on and became. And like I said, what caused the curse? You broke a woman's heart. Proving, don't make the woman angry, guys. It will come back to haunt you. This goes for women too, and yeah, either way, just don't break the hearts because it comes back to haunt you. But sorry, I got tongue tied here. And it's among the list of classic shows to have modern films to try to revive, such as Lone Ranger and other show. The Munsters with Mockingbird Lane. Johnny Depp doing his version of Tonto in The Lone Ranger. The Green Hornet. It's another one of those where they took something old and they tried to give it a new look and hope that it worked to make money off of it. Unfortunately, as much as I like Johnny Depp's acting, no, he could not do this movie. I don't know who came up with the idea for the movie. I do not recommend it to be watched unless you're really looking for a comedy rather than a dark soap opera style movie. And this one had 3 movies, actually. It had one that went on during the time of the series. I mean, that came when the series was coming to a close. It had one sometime later, and then, like I said, it had the Johnny Depp one. The Johnny Depp one I recommend avoiding. The other 2 I have not seen. But anyways, if you go on the show Tubi, if you go on the streaming app Tubi, you can catch all of the Dark Shadows episodes. Although there is a debate, and I'm not sure how many episodes they actually have on there. But supposedly, there's a debate on whether it's 1,225 episodes long or 1,226 episodes long. Because supposedly there's a missing episode that was released on VHS later that didn't make it to TV. Which is why there's the debate on this, and I'm not sure how many the streaming app will have. But I'm also not sure on certain other things about it like that. Also, something I didn't realize, and that my mother didn't realize, is that 2 of the Charlie's Angels were actually offered roles in the series. But before that, sorry. Back to the thing about classic shows to a modern, and I was talking about, this is the, Dark Shadows is the only soap opera to spawn 3 movies. Dallas, as far as I know, had a second TV series that came in the 90s before they did the reboot in the 2000s, but nobody really cared for it. But anyways, back to my thing about the Charlie's Angels and Dark Shadows. Sorry, I ain't been up long. I haven't been up long. Jacqueline Smith was offered the role of Victoria Winters in the series, but there's 2 theories as to why she wasn't Victoria. The first one was that she actually turned it down, though there's no reasoning behind it, apparently. The second one was that when she went to read for Victoria, the head writer of the series didn't like her read, and so they went in another direction. And a person who actually got the role on the show, the angel who actually got a role on the show, was the Alabama native, Kate Jackson, who took on the role of Daphne. Sorry, I don't remember the character's last name in the series. When you look at her, looks completely different from her time in the Angels. Okay, now here's a rumor I found that I couldn't confirm, and it's also because I haven't gone back and watched it again yet, which I plan to do, is that it took 400 episodes before they actually said the word vampire in the series. Now, I can understand the first 20-something because Barnabas Collins wasn't meant to be an actual character in the series. He wasn't even in the series originally. He didn't come in the first 20-something episodes because they didn't have the idea to use him as a vampire until they got in trouble, ratings-wise, and had to find a way to make the ratings work. But when they started using the vampire character, They would usually reference it in some other way, such as he's not alive, or he walks like the living, but he's not one of them, or something like that. Also, another rumor I found, because I only found it in one place, so that's why I'm listing it as a rumor, is that writers actually had it planned that Barnabas in the series finale, if the series had went on sometime longer, was actually going to be cured of his vampirism. Because the idea was that, according to the rumor, him and the doctor would get together and they would leave town, go off, live somewhere in the mountains in Asia, where the doctor would actually figure out the cure to the disease, and they would live like that. And that was actually going to be the ending. To me, that's a weak ending, because I will give the movie credit. Okay, this is where I'll give the movie that Johnny Depp did a little bit of credit. The ending they used, I liked better for it in that way. This one, I mean, the way the rumor ending would have been, I was against. I would have wanted to hurt somebody, because that's too much of a Disney style happy ending, and it doesn't work for what the show was supposed to be a dark show. So yeah, having a little bit of happiness in it's okay, but having him cured of vampirism would have just ruined it, because he would have had no reason. I mean, then it would have lost the dark. I mean, what made it so dark? Another interesting fact is that in the show there were two portraits in it. One of Quentin Collins, which took from the Dorian Gray story, where the person didn't age, but the painting itself would take on the damage and bad habits. I mean, would take on the damage caused by the bad habits and the aging that Dorian should have. And also, when it comes to Dorian Gray, a little side note, I recommend watching the black and white picture of Dorian Gray. It's an old one, and it's a good one, though. The more modern one that was in color, I'm not sure how many there have been on this, but the one I watched was a black and white, and I loved it. The modern one that's a color one, it was alright, but it focused too much on other things than the actual story of, like, than on the story. But anyways, um, which also, as another side note, it was actually listed by multiple sites, a number of literary things, a number of literary connections that you can find between Dark Shadows and classic literature, such as Dracula with the vampires, um, the picture of Dorian Gray, a number of Lovecraft, oddly enough, that I didn't put together, including the Call of Cthulhu, uh, stories dealing with witches. I mean, this thing, and these lists went on forever. And like I said, these are multiple sites. And there's one I wished I'd wrote down, because it listed them in order, and it even gave better examples than I'm giving of just the titles. It actually gave specific examples. And I loved that it did, because it was wonderfully done. But anyways, like I said, with Quentin Collins' photo, it would age and take on damage that his body wouldn't. He would stay practically immortal, which is what Dorian Gray did. The problem is, if the painting was ever destroyed, his body would take on the damage and the painting would be restored to its actual form, where it was the young one. At least in the original Dorian Gray story. And that was the spell that was used in it. Now, for the second image, and the second portrait in it, is the portrait of the witch, Angelique. Her painting was special in that if she was ever in danger, her painting would actually reflect it. It would fade and crack as she was affected by it. But when she was restored to her natural state, or when she was healthy again, the image would reflect it and be healthy and just as perfect as it was as she was with it, as she looked. Also, now this one actually surprised me. The interior of the Collinswood Mansion was shot in the New York City, in the New York studios, but the exterior of it is actually a real place. It's in Newport, Rhode Island. The Cary I might have the location wrong, but it's in Rhode Island. It's a place called the Cary Mansion. You can find it online, images of it. Very beautiful place, and I would love to visit this place personally if I had the money and the ability to travel for it. Also, in 2004, 16 years ago, this show, which had been off the air since 71, but in syndicate, it had not been a soap opera since 71, but it had been in syndication multiple times, mainly on the Sci-Fi Channel, before it became SYFY, but even then. But in 2004, it was ranked number 19. Dark Shadows was ranked number 19 in the top 25 cult shows ever because of what it was based around. The vampires, the werewolves, the supernatural. Also, I don't know how I missed this, and it surprised me still. The character, the actress, Denise Nickerson, who, if any of you saw the original Chocolate Factory movie known as Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the one who portrayed Violet, the girl who turns into the blueberry on there, actually played the character of Amy Jennings on Dark Shadows. But she would also appear on the Brady Bunch, and she was a regular on the Electric Company. And for those of you who were born in the 2000s, or some of you born in the 90s, ask your grandparents and ask your grandparents about the Electric Company. The actor who got the role of Barnabas Collins, Jonathan Frid, actually admitted in an interview that he never expected to become the heartthrob that Barnabas Collins became. He thought Barnabas was meant to be scary and that people would be scared of him. Well, he thought he was meant to be scary and that nobody was going to like him because of the way he was. And much like the rumor, since I couldn't find anything to prove it, about the guy who played Lurch on the Addams Family, he apparently was a big deal, where he was getting letters and people liked him a lot. And like I said, he was a major heartthrob. Oh, and earlier I mentioned that they had to add Barnabas to the series because of ratings. That's because the show was thought to be dragging along ratings-wise and doing so horribly that it was almost canceled in its first season. They were told, fix it in 25 weeks or else. And I might have that wrong, it's 25 days, but I might have misread that. And if I did, I apologize. So if you find it, let me know in the comments. But anyways, when they did this, they decided, the writers got together, they thought it over, and they're like, let's add a vampire who doesn't want to be a vampire, who actually hates this. And they came up with Barnabas. So he was, in fact, an afterthought to the complete series. He wasn't even meant to be a main character that he became. And when the show went off the air in 1971, it was replaced by a new version of the game show Password, which goes along with another rumor, if I've got my game show host correctly, that Bert Convoy, I can't pronounce his last name, that he was actually considered for the role of Barnabas originally. Okay, now for my final notes. Why? Okay. Something people might like to know. You take the Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, the Munsters, and the Addams Family in all versions that they had running, and this includes their revivals, versus the original Dark Shadows soap opera. Not including the revival they did with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, but just the original run. But you take all with Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, the Munsters, the Addams Family, take those, you include their revivals that they had for each one, and the original run of the series, and add them all together, it comes out to 705 episodes. The original run of Dark Shadows, without including the revival, 1,225 or 1,226, pending the lost episode argument, which means that given the other shows that were considered to have gothic or twisted elements to it, and I'm sorry, M. Night Shyamalan has nothing on Dark Shadow on these, and neither do most other writers. And it's nothing against them because they're actually all good, but again, you take those shows, particularly in their like I said, the shows versus Dark Shadows. Dark Shadows, yes, it was a soap opera, so it had 5 days to run with. But at the same time, those other shows are the more remembered, more popular shows. Dark Shadows is the one that got the cult following out of it, in my viewpoint. But like I said, the difference between them is 520 to 521 in favor of Dark Shadows, which I find fair because the show was so good. But my grade for it is a B. Just a solid B. Here's the reasons why. One, it started slow. It would gain momentum, but like a lot of shows today, they didn't know when to quit. So instead of trying to find a way to end it in a way that made sense, and I understand they were trying to make it a soap opera. I understand it was a soap opera, so they were trying to make it keep going. The problem is when you're in a Gothic soap opera, you're going to end up repeating stuff. You're going to end up repeating things after a while, or trying to find ways that don't make sense, and would throw the fans away. So it was a bad idea in that sense. So when it started to drop off in later seasons, they still tried to keep it going, and even threw in ideas that weren't making sense to use, which led to even more ratings drops, which led to the eventual cancellation of the series. But the positive is, while it was short-lived, it was a great soap opera, where it wasn't your traditional, oh yeah, he's going to do this, he's going to do that. Oh, it's his brother, it's his sister, it's their cousin coming back from the dead this whole time. Or, oh, some other trope that is very common now, some other device that is used today. It's used even today, that we've seen hundreds of times, basically. They actually focused on a way to take what was common then, what was considered probably new then, and use it to their advantage with the Gothic elements, and make a great story out of it. And there's actually arguments today on how it should have ended with love interests if they did, which I find interesting in that aspect. But anyways, let me know if you guys have watched. Let me know in the comments if you guys have watched the Dark Shadows series from the 60s through the 70s only, or if you, or what you thought, and what you thought of it, and also what you think I should do for an upcoming video, because, like I said, I read these comments and I enjoy knowing what you think. And until the next video, have a good one.